Hello model citizens, I'm DS the Plastic Mechanic and welcome to the final part of our Fujimi Garage and Tools build. This is Beginner Builds Part 5. I'm a beginner and I'm building. So in Part 1 I did a bit of a mad unboxing and then got straight to work cutting, sanding and assembling most of the parts. In Part 2 I painted a minifigure. Now obviously a garage needs a boss, but this quick build gave me a chance to test out some of the paints, washes and painting techniques that I'll need to use to build the rest of this diorama. In Part 3 I tested out both acrylic and enamel primers and then airbrushed the parts with their main colours. In Part 4 I tested then painted all of the metal colours and did some more basic assembly. So welcome to Part 5 where we're going to wrap this classic kit build up. The first thing to do was airbrush the black parts. These were mainly small parts like wheels and handles, and once again I used Vallejo paints diluted to 50% with airbrush medium. Now in Part 2 I showed how to use masking fluid to protect certain areas while I was painting the minifigure, but I didn't show how I also used masking tape to achieve clean lines along prominent edges. Building this Fujimi kit however, there are lots more opportunities to use this technique, so here's a quick demonstration. Although this tape seems to stick well, I made sure to burnish or rub down on it to make sure no paint seeped underneath. It doesn't have enough tack to take off the underlying paint, so this worked out really well. With all of the relevant parts masked off, I went back to the airbrush and reduced paint and laid down 2 to 3 coats of black. As a beginner, I don't have much experience with model paints or with airbrushing, but I'm super impressed by this Vallejo range and I'll definitely keep using it unless I find something even better. I removed all of the masking tape and fluid and was relieved to find all of the lines were clean. The acrylic paint was dry by the time I got around to removing the masking, and I wasn't being particularly gentle when taking it off, basically using whatever it took to remove it. But the masking was a success as far as I was concerned, and I just kept on moving. The stacking toolboxes, which took the most masking, had a few issues. The areas I'd painted black hadn't really covered, and I had flecks of black paint on yellow areas that I hadn't planned for. The little black flecks looked like chips and scratches, so I put those down as a happy little accident, but the black lines needed touching up with a paintbrush to look properly finished. I used undiluted paint for this to make sure I only needed to do this once. Now I have no idea how I got this dark streak across the bottom of the upper toolbox, but I tried to repaint it yellow with some of my reduced paint. This had almost no effect, so I had to undercoat the area with some white before I could repaint it properly. I didn't do a thorough job on the white undercoat and the dark streak still showed through the 2 coats of yellow, but it looked like it was just dirty, so pow, another happy little accident. I touched up any remaining areas with base colour and set all those paints and parts aside. Next, I brush painted in any metal colours that could be seen but were too small to be worth masking off an airbrush, like the wheel axles. With all of the parts now base coated, I airbrushed the 50-50 mix of matte and brilliant gloss Montana varnish onto all the major parts so I can move on to the detailing. First, I masked off and painted a little voltmeter onto the battery charger in Vallejo Dead White. Next, I painted matte varnish onto all of the wheels. This really separated the finish of the wheels from the rest of the parts and made them look more realistic. It made the metal wheels look used and the rubber wheels look rubbery? I used matte varnish on the jack stands because they also needed to look used. I tried to keep it as thin as possible so it didn't add any unintended texture. I used matte varnish on the rolling seat and the creeper, but this time I actually tried to create texture, especially towards the centre. I wanted it to look like it was made from cloth and had become slightly baggy from use. I added layers of varnish as it dried and eventually it looked pretty effective. Next, I used gloss varnish on the voltmeter I had painted on the battery charger. This added a decent shine and made it look like it had a glass cover. I carried on with brush painting the gloss varnish, painting the air conditioning tank and the battery. This varnish has a good self-leveling quality and it didn't leave any brush marks once it had dried. With all the parts varnished and protected from chipping, I moved on to paint the screens on the diagnostics computer. I started with a thin coat all over the screens and then put on a second thicker coat towards the centres. This gave a good effect, with the screens looking like they were lit from within. I needed to touch up the edges of the small screen with some more Vallejo black, but this only took a few seconds to do. To continue with the diagnostic computer screens, I painted some pale grey wash into all the recesses to make them look slightly dusty. Now this took much longer than I expected, but only because I kept painting it and then wiping it off and then painting it again to try and get the right effect. Eventually though, they looked dusty but not too dirty, and I could move on to the next task. I added a red power button and then used some black to clean up the edge. Back to the pale grey wash and I painted detail into the keyboard. My goal here was to highlight the keys a bit more, so I let the wash run between them and then cleaned off around the keys with a cotton bud. Now this worked really well and really brought up the detail. Finally I could cement the screens into the base unit. The design of the parts on this kit made this super easy. I could just push them in and let the cement run down into place from above. Next, more assembly. and a whole bunch of wheels. I used super glue for the smallest of these to ensure a solid bond. I started the detail painting and the custom parts with the parts watching sync. I painted an on and an off button onto the control panel. Now painting circles isn't easy, but it's definitely doable after painting eyes onto a minifigure. The first real custom part I made was the electrical cables for the battery charger. The cables supplied in the kit were way too short and thick to be realistic. So I started by cutting 2 short lengths off to connect the clamps to new custom cables made from wire. I super glued these into place and set them aside to dry. Next, I curled the wire into 2 loose coils that would look more realistic when laid on the ground. And finally I used a rounded pair of pliers to bend the end sharply towards the terminals on the back of the unit. With the cables bent to shape, I could drill out the terminals ready to insert and glue in these new cables. To finish off these custom cables, I added another short length of the plastic hose supplied in the kit to eventually become the little protective boots that cover the connecting ends, just like I did on the clamp ends. I fed some of that same wire down the supplied vacuum cleaner hose. The hose looks pretty thick and dead straight as supplied, but this custom wire core meant it could be posed more naturally. I then added another custom electricity cable in the same way as on the battery charger, shaping a length of wire and adding an electrical boot. The final touch was to drill a hole into the supplied plug and super glue that into place. With all the cables finished, I painted them with plenty of Vallejo black paint and left them to dry. Moving on to the oil catch can, I again added a core of wire to the supplied hose so that this too could be posed in a more natural position. For the air compressor, I decided to completely replace the supplied drive bell. This piece didn't look realistic at all, so I super glued 2 small round watch parts in the right place and made a belt from some thin tape that had been folded in half and painted black. I super glued the belt into place, and this upgrade really took this part to a new level. I painted in a pressure gauge and painted a few parts with gloss, and in the end this air compressor along with the vacuum cleaner really gave me confidence to do more custom work in the future. The air conditioning servicing unit went together next, and again it's well designed and went together with no problems. Next I did all of the weathering and laid all the decals. I started with the pale grey wash. I used this in all the places that I wanted to look dusty as opposed to dirty. Next I used the black wash. This was only used in the areas that would normally be the dirtiest, like on the engine hoist and on most of the wheels. This kit doesn't come with any decals, so I used a set of stickers that came in a vintage Revell Porsche GT1 kit. I wouldn't have put them on a car, but used on this kit they look like scale vinyl stickers, so they worked out really well. In order to get some of these stickers down straight, I used a toothpick to hold the sticker and then pushed it down, rather than fight the sticker by holding it in my fingers or with tweezers. Back to the black wash, and again I applied this to all the parts that would normally be the dirtiest, including the tyre rack, the tyre mounting machine and the bottom of the vacuum cleaner. I also used it to bring out the details in many parts, like on the wheels and around the desk. The black wash worked really well. The black wash really worked well on the parts washing sink, especially as splashes and as fingerprints. The final part of this build was applying sepia shade and umber washes to everything to represent dirt and grime. I mixed these with a few drops of water so I could build the colour up gradually. It was probably 40% water at first, but after a few applications I increased the intensity as I got more familiar with how it was laying down. I put pure water onto certain areas like the upper part of the sink's base, mainly to prevent getting a tide mark or a hard line where the wash stopped. With water on the surface, I could get a smooth but random blend that looked more like dirt that had built up over time. With this done, I could paint on these final sepia and umber washes and bringing this Fujimi Garage and Tools remix build to an end. Did I see it to an end? I forgot to paint the metal detail onto the engine hoist, so I did that with some Vallejo steel paint and then gave that a quick wash. And then I glued the custom wires into place. But that was it. I'm a beginner and I built this kit. And it looks pretty good. The future of this diorama is looking pretty bright. Now if you haven't watched the previous parts of this build, it's definitely worth checking out the playlist to see all the techniques I've tried so far. I haven't built a building yet and I've only got one car, but you can be sure I'll be pushing myself to improve with every video. The next 494 garage upload will be on the UK Southern Expo model show and competition, so hit that notification bell to be sure you don't miss that. However, until the next build video, I'm going to leave you with a few close-ups of the build so far. I'm DS the Plastic Mechanic. You've been watching 494 Garage Beginner Builds. Leave a like if you like, and until next time, I'm out.